Hello and welcome to Dale's Gaming, and this is KSP Galileo on hard mode. And in the last episode we got some rockets into space, and we got them flying and basically did the basic sounding rockets basis of flight, of history. And in this episode we have one last contract to finish off, the cross the radiation belt, and also then start looking at how Sputnik and establishing a stable orbit for satellites, which Sputnik effectively was, although it wasn't effectively stable, but we'll go into that a little bit later. Now we have unlocked a bit of tech, so we were able to build a new rocket to do the cross the radiation belt, but we have one important factor: is we've only got 4 days left to accept these missions. So because we're using construction time, I've got to do anything and I'll launch within 4 days. The next stage then to get through the radiation layer and into deeper space than just the edges was a combination of rockets, and this was also testing the first ways to do staging of high-speed rockets. So what we've got here is basically a reproduction of our version A, which was in the historical, was created by Boeing, and it was the WAC Corporal sounding rocket, and they attached that to the end using some specialist stable separators, or decouplers as they are in KSP, to a V2 rocket, which I have here. So we're basically, it's going to be a somewhat explosive decouple. We have a radial decoupler, and that will give a little bit of a less than ideal separation, but it will work. Now I'll just move this into place just so it looks a little bit better, and also we can check to see how accurate it is. It's pretty still accurate. The final stage is still spin stabilized, but these first 2 rockets, or first rocket stage, has atmospheric stabilization, so it's going to be controlled, and we'll use the remote tech controller. So we won't sim this one because I have already done that. So basically what we now got to do is build this. So we're gonna say to build. Okay, that's added to our build list. We go here, yep, save and continue. So the next problem is this is going to be built in 7 days, which is not long enough to get our launch window and still accept the other 2 contracts. So what we're going to have to do in options for construction time is rush to build, which is going to cost money. So we're going to keep pressing 10%. It costs us 1306 each time. Maybe this should increase, but hey ho, I think so. It's going to be ready in 4 days. I'll do it one more time. Yeah, 4 days. So that gives us 5 hours to launch, recover, and accept the other 2 contracts. That will be close. So we're just rolling out the V2D bumper, and we still have 5 hours left to accept these contracts. So yeah, it will just work. We're cutting it fine. But hey, that's part of KSP, and we're going to follow in some way, launch fast and fail quickly and repeat, which is the SpaceX way of doing it rather than the Boeing way. So having completed our final checks, made sure that the staging is correct, and we're clear and ready with an 85 degrees, that's gone to 81, let's see, 85 degree angle, so we don't land too far from KSC. I don't want this to get into orbit, I want this to go deep into space to get those radiation belts. So we'll see it from a bit further away, and let's launch this. And we're off, and it's a little bit of a wobbly start whilst it's trying to attain that 85 degree until it gets speeded up. This could be problematic if this does not get in. It has stabilized, but that was a little rocky. If this was a failed mission, that would not have gone down well. So okay, our solid boosters are firing okay. They are all did fire. We have got the possibility of failures. Failures to ignition. That is something that Kerbalism does tend to do on the reliability of some of these rockets. But these solid rockets are fairly reliable. We're getting some science being sent out. The thin, slightly shrimp ones on the side have now burnt out. We're on our sustainer in the centre. That's gone. We're now doing our spin stabilised final stage. We had a separation okay, which was good. We seem to be getting good thrust. As I say, we're just using it's going to be turned off now because we were just using spin stabilisation on this here. Oh, come disappear. There we go. And we'll see what height we're going to attain at this moment. We need to get about 200,000, I'm reckoning. We're at 57. I've still got a fair bit to burn on that engine. So let's hope we've got enough acceleration. I'm not in a time warp or anything, because I need all the physics working on trying to get that as high an apoapsis as possible. Still going. What have we got? We have a 120 30. That's accelerating quite nicely now on this last part. Will we get out to a good high apoapsis on this? 75, 80, over the 200. Good. Where are we going to get to? 240, 262. That's not too bad. Looks like we're getting some upper atmosphere heating at the end of that on those fins. That's alright. Right, now we'll just high speed this all the way through. We're still sending radiation scan data. And as we come back in to the surface of orbit, some nice science there. And did we complete? Yes, the contract has been completed. And because we have Capcom here, I can, to be certain, we've got 4 hours left, but let's take these two other missions because we know we didn't want them, and then that way I won't forget and get building on the next craft. Now, we're not too worried about retrieving our vessel here. That's something we'll need to look at once we've got a bit more science to spend on all of the vehicles. So let's just get this one completed. So yes, the vehicle was destroyed, but we can go back to the Space Center. So although we had a destruction, we've now got a good 27 science. So we can now unlock, hopefully, some more items, which could help us. Now, these couplers are definitely something that could help us in this next stage. Certainly. So I'm thinking of unlocking those. The parachute, I would have liked to unlock this as well. Okay, we've got a coupler system that's working, although not ideal. I'm thinking I want these RCS. Now, yeah, I want the RCS there, so we'll unlock those, because we need some control, and we'll sort out the other ones once we have a bit more science. And with the race now on to get a satellite into space, there is two competing design agencies within the Galilean Kerbin area, taking two different views as to how to get into space. not necessarily reliably. These are Kerbals after all, and generally we have the von Braun version, and this is based upon the Vanguard, which is a 4-stage rocket system. Mainly with boosters in the first stage, solid boosters just to get it up, then a good second stage of liquid engine motors, and a third stage, and a final 4th stage to put the actual satellite into orbit. And this is based upon the Vanguard, which was a commercial endeavour by the Martin Group, I believe it was. And the difference is, obviously I am limited in Kerbal with my 40 part count. They actually use gimbaled engines, but here we couldn't. So we've created a close as I can, but using aerodynamics for manoeuvrability. So that was the first one, and they were close to getting a launch. The launch vehicle, or the ending launch satellite, is very small on the Vanguard. If you look at pictures, the guys actually are holding the final complete rocket in their hands over their head. It was a very small satellite they were trying to put into orbit. And the Vanguard missile was a fairly small missile in general, but trying to get to a quite good height. It had good thrust to weight ratio, but its small size and for its height did mean it was a little unstable, which did result in some interesting results. But hopefully we can get a slightly better launch here if we can get off the ground. And you can see it's not that stable. The end-on current decoupling system is not the best, and it looks like we're gonna be having. Can it hold? It's fighting. It's fighting, and yeah, I don't think that's a good sign for our first launch of the Vanguard 1. No, that's definitely not a good end result there. Yes, never mind. I think that's yeah, we go to Space Center. We have to take that as a catastrophic failure of the Vanguard, and it is one of the problems of being somewhat flexible. And the competing design is a much more power orientated version, and this is my version of the R7, which did actually launch Sputnik, and we can see it's got a it's basically a 2-stage with a launch of the satellite, which is unpowered. It's just a releasing rather than a launching, with a central sustainer liquid fueled central core which burns all the way through the process, and 4 boosters to initially get that it moving off of the platform and into space. And yeah, it's mainly based upon using a lot of power to get the vessel into space. And these were the R7 was based upon a intercontinental ballistic missile, which was actually putting a few tons into space. So the satellite that this could launch was intended to be much larger. So the capacity and the size of the payload could be much bigger on the R7 variant. The R7 was a slightly different design by the Russian Space Agency, and they used the boosters on the side, and it was interesting that when it was being built, they found they couldn't build it horizontally or when it was standing up. They actually had to suspend the main section by its central area and then attach the boosters onto it whilst it was literally hanging from the connection points, which is an interesting element. But this is a much more powerful ship, and also it's ground controlled rather than just allowing for our gravity turn. This is actually starting to use the Kerbal Operating System, so we do actually have a Kerbal computer on board. Now I'll quickly show the program I'm using, and although there is many very advanced KOS scripts for launching aircraft into a stable orbit, I'm setting myself the challenge of only using what would be really available for vessels at that time. So if we just go and look at the script we've got here, so let me just bring this up onto the screen a little bigger if I can. There we go. It's not ideal to see, but hopefully you should see what we've got. So this is very simplistic programming, so as I say, I'm only using some of the sensors they would have had. I have got an apoapsis code in here, but generally I'm using launch time, mission time, and also things such as altitude, etc., which is what they would have had available to the actual systems at the time, because they were basically using gyros and inertial guidance. So we've got a initial set of the heading. We're just going to use 90 degrees at this moment. We're going to make sure the RCS and the SAS are off, do a quick little countdown, then lock our throttle to 100%, lock the steering initially just to up, and then ignite by doing our first stage. We'll then wait until we've got a bit of altitude before starting our initial roll and start of a gravity turn on the heading, correct heading. We then set up a couple of triggers for our staging. Rather than using, as I see on some ones which use thrust to 0, this would have used mission timings, because that's what they would have known when they were doing these missions. They wouldn't have varied the throttle. Those boosters and that burn until the end, and they may have been able to cut them. They weren't using solid boosters, but generally it would have been after a certain amount of time cut the booster. So we know how long the boosters are going to run for, so it'll cut those, and we know how long the center stage will run for, so we will cut at a particular time. So the whole idea then of this program is the next stage, which is the prograde turn. So starting at 3,000 meters, it's going to try and get the ship, the rocket, pointing at a particular pitch at a particular height, and that will be its starting point for insertion, burn, and releasing of the satellite. And I've just set up a very simple analog turn here, which just changes the ship's pitch based upon a simple algorithm based upon what altitude do I want to be at and what altitude am I at now, and it does a very simple turn. Nothing advanced there, just a simple, fairly simple turn. It will slightly turn faster at the top, but generally it just turns fairly steadily onto that heading I'm after, or sorry, the altitude I'm after. And then finally, for doing the insertion burn, it will, when it hits, this is where I do use apoapsis. So when I see my apoapsis hit a certain value, here I've set 70,000, it heads on to the -5. So the and that should hopefully get us onto a orbit. That is the intention. But things don't always go as planned, as you can imagine. Because this is Kerbal Space Program, and things happen. And also, this isn't, those figures are still variable. They're what I've calculated to work, done a little bit of testing. It's close. But at this moment, if we just run that script, we shall see it taking off. That's the initial countdown, and we are coming up to 1 ignition. That's ignition of the first boosters and central section. Not everything has been marked, but this should. Somehow I've turned on the aero indicators. Oh well, we'll leave them on for the moment. It'll be interesting to see what's happening. And we've done our roll program, so we're heading on a direction of 0. Okay, just turn the use aerodynamic forces off. So we've started our turn to prograde, and we are getting some telemetry, and so far we're running better than the Vanguard was. We're holding our pitch quite nicely. There go the boosters. Not quite a Kerbal KOS. Kerbal KOS? I've forgotten the name of the guy that did them. I might work on that to try and get a better cross on those. I'll see them next time, hopefully. But we're continuing our turn and we're pitching over, although we are now in a gravity. It looks like the gravity is taking over. One of the problems we have is that our aerodynamic forces are not quite enough to hold the pitch on this particular rocket. It looks like we need a little bit more force to be able to hold that turn. Just checking to make sure our fuel is being used correctly, and we've got to make sure that liquid fuel's going via the bottom, which is fine. Going in there, but I think we're most probably a little top heavy. We need a little bit of more aerodynamic control, or an alternative method for holding the pitch on this last stage. And it looks like we're going to be heading for a big crash there, unfortunately. Yeah, that's unfortunately the way of the world. And testing, we didn't get any failures, it just was not able to hold the correct attitude. I did make some changes in testing. In simulations it was able to, so I must have made a change somewhere, but that's life. We'll just let that continue down. I think we need some more controls. It looks like something's just oh, there we go. It just unfortunately I don't think we even got a distance record, which was a little unfortunate, but we've had a crash, which happens. Just waiting for the system to realise I've crashed and realise that I can exit. Come on, there we go. So we'll go back to the Space Centre. Now we have got some science from that and our other ventures, so maybe we can look at getting some more research and development underway to help us build our craft a little bit better. So what have we got? What would be this one? Stability is, yeah, I still think we need, yes, if we got linear control jets, but we're also going to need monopropellant tanks as well, and also these larger fuel tanks could be useful, so I think we need to research that area as well. So that's now researched. Can we get this one as well? We might as well. It's only structural, some structural tubes. Yep, we'll just, that's only 1 point. So that should help us to get some better equipment to build these up. I would like to get these as well, but they're 18 points at this moment. So let's just see how long that's going to take. So that's going to take 17 days. 1 day for that stability, which will give us the RCS thruster but not RCS tanks, and then the basic construction. Then we can start thinking about rebuilding our rockets. With the research complete on the extra parts for our vessels, the new R7 is ready for a launch with its new RCS thruster control for that final stage, not relying no longer on the fins for that final part. So when we look at it, the offset view, we've got the thrusters, the central part which is going to be sustainer all the way through, and then finally releasing the Sputnik little probe at the end. So this is now ready to launch at one of our facilities. At the alternative facility, the R7 is waiting for its commands, so we load up the computer with the relevant script. So we switch to the local hard disk, then we run the, oops, that's the wrong one, we run the R7A, should be R7B, but we'll name it R7A for the moment. There we go, we have the countdown starting as we go on. Hopefully, if we don't get any issues during our ignition, and all the engines have ignited okay, and we're already getting a few bits of telemetry coming back, which is immediately going to give us some data straight away. We'll put that up there ready for when we see data start coming through. And we're into our roll program, which will stabilize any roll and give us a slight inclination towards our target, and our target isn't exactly 90 degrees. We are going to go off at a slight angle on this, and that is purposeful. If this is a successful launch, and we're coming up for separation of the first boosters, and they separate quite nicely. They don't have any parachutes at the moment, so they will crash into the sea. Hopefully they won't hit the launch pad in any way. So we're already transmitting some more telemetry data, which is good. A small amount, every little bit counts. And now the RCS are holding us on our required pitch. If we have a look, we've still got a reasonable apoapsis. We've still got a long way to go at this time. We've got quite a long burn on this stage 2. This is going to take us hopefully all the way into the into orbit, so we can release our Sputnik and then get all of the nice data. Now, Sputnik itself was launched in 1957, October, and it was on the R7A. There was a reserve unit ready because the R7 had quite a few problems on launches and quite a few failures. Generally, on the Russian space program, they don't name or mention any of the failures. You only hear about successes, whereas with the American systems, such as the Vanguard, we heard about all of the failures they were having on the Vanguard. So we're coming up, it's trying to hold the pitch up. It is holding the pitch, which is good. Always worth keeping on how much of a pitch, so it's holding it about right. Our thruster weight is still quite good, not too high, holding quite the required pitch quite nicely now. And as we come in hopefully towards that final point, is our apoapsis still going up. Our apoapsis is still increasing, which is good. It's a little, looks like it's a little underpowered at this one. We've got a thruster weight of 1.7, so we should be okay. It's holding the thrust. It should be it's trying to push us down a little bit at the moment. We've still got some monopropellant left. Hopefully we do have enough to complete the orbit. It's going to be tight. As long as we can get onto the correct angle at the end of the prograde turn, then hopefully we won't need the monopropellant anymore, but we're almost out of monopropellant, but we are coming in towards, we are 71. We do have an atmospheric exit, so we should, if we can hold this angle now. If not, we'll have to adjust the computer program a little bit. Almost out of monopropellant, but we are, I think, ready for an orbital insert. Yes, it's gone to the orbital insert. So will we manage to get a necessary apparatus? Oh, we have had an engine failure. So one of the engines has failed. That is a part of Kerbalism, that you know, engine failures etc. are part of this game, and yeah, that's a bad sign. So the R7 has had a failure, and yeah, that's gonna be a loss. We did get up high, I think. We're not going for a totally circular orbit here, we're just trying to get into orbit. We've got 371. I think there's a chance if we had managed to have that second engine stay active, there's a good chance that would have actually circularized. So yeah, that's a pity. We are gonna, hopefully though, even though we are not in the not gonna get a full orbit. Let's just have a look at the model. Yeah, there were the debris, and that stage was destroyed as well. We might get some science, because we are still going around quite nicely, orbiting the planet. So we may still get some science from some of these other zones with any luck as we pass by and come into the atmosphere again. So the electrical charge has finally depleted on our probe, so we managed to get a fair bit around. We got some more science, but yeah, that's interesting that the battery only lasted about a quarter of a rotation, so we may need some extra batteries on this as well. So that's a good sign, or something to be noted and something to change on the design. But yeah, we'll let that one crash. You'll notice that the rotation is still going on because I'm running persistent rotation, even though I speed this up as we come back into the atmosphere. It's still rotating all the time, which I think is the way it should be. So yeah, there's a potential chance that would have worked if not for that engine failure, but A-Sign is potentially need some more batteries in the probe. So as everything explodes and breaks up as it comes back into the atmosphere, just heating up as is expected, and we should get a complete. It's actually surviving quite well, that last part actually. Oh, it actually survived re-entry. That's quite surprising really. I think it must be yeah, we've got the old style deployment on the end there, and that potentially helped it stay in the atmosphere. We might even get a recovery of this if it survives splashdown in the water. No, didn't survive splashdown in the water, but you know, that there was always a chance. If we go back to the Space Center, so even as a failure we managed to get up to 16.7 science. Not enough to get that next stage, but that's certainly a little bit closer. So it is now time for the Jupiter to see if it can succeed where the R7 Sputnik failed to launch. So I have called this the Jupiter rocket because there was a before Sputnik in 1956 they were ready to send up a Jupiter based satellite, but the US government decided that they would prefer if a private company built a rocket to put up. They didn't want to start the precedence of putting military satellites orbiting the Earth before a commercial or private venture was. So the Jupiter was actually a series of Redstone missiles, which are part of the Jupiter medium missile ballistic missile. So yeah, eventually the Jupiter was used its stages after Vanguard failed for the Juno and Explorer 1. So Juno was basically a Jupiter missile, but the serial numbers were all sort of changed, so it wasn't obviously military. So it's a little bit of an interesting item there. So we'll run the program to do the turn. So we have our initial countdown timer. Now this is a 3-stage missile. The original one was a 4, but I can't do the very small solid rockets that were in the last 2 stages of the original Juno and Jupiter missiles. But we're still going to use a spin stabilization at the end, so we'll see how this goes. Now this has got quite a different trajectory to the K7. It goes quite high, then turns over. Its prograde turn is not as aggressive, but then it does use quite a few so it uses solid rockets a lot more than the R7. Its first stage is a liquid fueled rather than using booster rockets, and it was used, the Redstone, that first stage, I think I said before, was similar to the Thor stage, was used in many future rocket systems in various stages. That engine setup and engine the engines that were built for that were used in future NASA space missions. So we're going on to the prograde turn at this time, and it's holding pitch quite nicely, and we'll keep an eye on the apoapsis on the down in the bottom left hand corner. Now obviously the rockets at this time period didn't have the computing power to calculate apoapsis. A lot of the computers in these systems weren't even as powerful as your average calculator nowadays, so they were just using fairly much more analog type of systems rather than digital systems to just measure the time and what altitude, how far we had travelled, what direction, etc., to give a basis of where they were and what to do next. Some of these systems were more ground controlled, so they did have a radio link so that the ground could decide when to cut engines or make minor changes, especially in the later R7s. But these early ones were fairly much, you set them off and they just were all set to do things at a specific point. And there was a lot of calculation done by hundreds of people because they didn't have all the big computers. They did, but they weren't as reliable. There was still a lot of people working out a lot of maps. So we've ejected that first stage, and we're now on to the long burn solid rocket here, which I would have liked to have made as a liquid fueled one, but again, part count at this time. And this is just going to be putting us ready onto the insertion. We're up to a 70,000, so we've got a good apoapsis now, and we're turning for our orbital burn now, so it should be holding about, I think, about 2 degrees upward. So we can have a look at how our, well, it looks on the map here. We can see our apoapsis heading out quite nicely. And our periapsis is the important bit, and this is our final stage. Now, heading out, it basically has got just keeps spinning to try and keep a certain amount of force, and we've got there, and just short again. We've only got up to 33, so the Jupiter rocket also not quite making that the insertion burn at the end correctly, so we're gonna get a 3/4 orbit and some data hopefully from here, but I'm gonna have to adjust some of the figures just to try and get that last the periapsis up. We're getting a good apoapsis, so I think if we can convert some of the apoapsis into periapsis, basically, we might have to have a negative burn as such. Let's just see if we're collecting some data on this trip as well. We're empty at the moment. Hasn't collected. This particular satellite has no extra science. It is purely as light as possible satellite with just gonna do telemetry data, and that's it. It's not sending any other data at all on this system. Let's just power off. Can I power the computer off? Jupiter 1 is almost out of power, so it's going to have a problem sending out any more reports, but we have got the land speed distance record and a land speed record. That stage got destroyed, obviously, and hopefully we'll get a little bit more science. But yeah, I'm going to have to work out what needs to happen on the apoapsis. Do I need to point a little bit more downward or upward on that final burn just to bring in the our periapsis up a little bit? So I will just have a bit of a work on that for our next system. But yep, failures is part of Kerbalism, and we've had one. This one was a design failure though. This is mostly on me. I haven't tested these to the nth degree because testing costs money, and things happen. You know, they're not the most stable ships in the rockets in the world. Okay, so we have lost all of the electricity now, so they're not the most stable ship out there. So with the race on to get the first satellite into orbit, the various space agencies from the USSK and the USSK are struggling and to get their designs set up, and the first one that managed to get a complete design has been the USSK's space agency with their updated R7, which is slightly changed with some extra monopropellant and the RCS thrusters placed at the bottom of the thrusters for extra control, and a slightly lighter end satellite compared to the previous versions, but still quite considerable main stage. It's also had a new updated fuel tanks in the centre to just alleviate the part count, but we're still at 39 out of 40, and that is the first one to run out onto the runway ready for launching. So with the rocket on the designated launch pad ready to launch, the script has been changed a bit during testing, and it's gone from being a lot more on the apoapsis to purely altitude based, except for the very final part, which is going to trigger on the periapsis. But that's only for the very final stage. Everything else has changed, and also I've done a little bit of reworking with some of the weight loops, etc. Removed them in preferential for lock on the to a script, so it should work out okay. So it's time for the R7B to try and get the first satellite out into space. So we've got the initial countdown of the from our alternate landing site at KSC2, and we've got a good initial launch in testing. We have had the occasion where the rockets have failed to ignite, and we've had a bit of a catastrophic launch, and on occasion also the rockets taken off at sometimes a little weird angle, just one of those random events that's happened, and lost us another particular rocket. But this time we've got to the first stage of running our roll program, and we're just now holding this for quite some time to get an initial burn up into the atmosphere. And then we start to do our prograde turn, which should sort of should bring us around into a fairly flat trajectory. Quite a steep trajectory. It's going to push us out to I think it's about, remember, about 7 to 8 degree powered flight before it goes into the final insertion burn. Now, reworking the script, I realised that a lot of my math skills were not quite up to it on working out insertion burns, etc. So it did take a bit of testing, and I realised I was making some fundamental mistakes with my nominals and where I needed to aim my burn, based because I'm not burning specifically at the apoapsis. You have to readjust things, and it's more difficult than I thought originally. And the people that originally launched the Sputnik back in 1957 did not have a Kerbal Space Program to run multiple tests, or even high supercomputers to run all of the testing. A lot of it was done by number crunching by people, so they really worked out all of the stages of this launch of the R7 with the Sputnik on board. And the Sputnik, on the original Sputnik, was about I think it was about 110 kilo satellite. It was launching up into space with a lot of batteries and the aerials. Because of the part count, mine is looking like the Sputnik, but we're going to call it the Kupnik maybe, or some other Kerbal name, but I'll call it Sputnik for the moment. But we're coming up on our burn, still going up. We've still got quite a bit of fuel left. We've got 100 seconds left in this particular second stage burn, which is going to take us all the way into the orbital section. Now, our boosters have all got destroyed, which is understandable. They don't have any sort of parachutes or any other way to descend. In the future, once the part counts are a little bit more generous, I'll be able to look at that. And we're coming up onto the slightly flatter part of our prograde burn, and I think it will be holding. It's still holding at that, coming down to about 10 degrees at the moment. It's steady on the pitch. Another area I've had some problems with has been the RCS occasionally going mad, and all of the RCS just firing and getting the pitch, and you're getting into a bit of a strange situation, not holding it. So we are going to 0. Actually, it's not. Yes, I think it's a different rocket I was thinking of that has a steep inclination. This one is ending the turn at about a 0. And if we use our maneuver node here, we have a pretty high apoapsis at this point. And now we go into the insertion burn. So if we go to our map at the moment, we can see we've already got quite a high apoapsis, and we're just bringing up the periapsis up to that final figure. And will it stop at 70? Yep, the engines have cut at 70, and we have about 5 seconds of fuel left, and that's the ejection of the satellite. And we have made it. We have got the first satellite into a stable orbit. So we've entered orbit, and that gives us strategies available, which we'll look at next time. And Sputnik 1 contract has been completed, and we have got one other contract that needs to be completed. And what do we need to do? So one thing we can't do is this other contract is we must return the satellite. So we've done the Sputnik, but we can't do the others. How about some data? Are we getting data? Oh, we have an upgrade. We actually have a temperature scan available on here. If we turn on the temperature scanning, how much are we going to get? We have... It's waiting at the moment. I don't think we're going to get a temperature scan on this particular vessel. I had to remove all the other experiments for the moment, just on this. Now, one thing that is interesting on the whole Sputnik situation, if I can find my other element, is the satellite itself was 110 kilos, but what a lot of people don't realize is the whole second stage, which is still in orbit as well. And so when they launched, they didn't just launch up, which was 100 odd kilo. They actually launched all of the second stage, which was a significant tonnage of rocketry. And when they were actually trying to find the Sputnik, they didn't used to zoom in directly on the Sputnik satellite. They'd go and find the second stage, which was travelling behind at a known distance, and then they would be able to find Sputnik based upon by looking ahead from the stage 2. So we're going over the... We've still got contact. One other problem we might have is losing contact, and we have lost connection now. So the satellite has lost connection because of its high apoapsis, I reckon, and just nothing in range. These have a good enough range, but this doesn't. This is also going the highest any other satellite has been so far, up to 3 million. That particular launch had a pretty high apoapsis, unfortunately, and our batteries have finally run out. So we've now lost total control of the satellite. We have no connection and or other elements, and this will now be circling. It's done a full navigation, and because there's no general decay, it will never ever fall back into Earth. I don't know if there is a mod out there. Anyone know of a mod that applies a small amount of decay on satellites? Just a small amount, so eventually debris and decay will burn up in the atmosphere. So this 70 would eventually go down a little bit every day. I don't know. That is the way it happens. The further you're out, that decay is smaller every time, but there is a small amount of decay on every connection. And although the Sputnik was a great advancement for man, and it was launched just at a time when many great leaders were meeting up, the USSR have also got their final testing for a launch vehicle, somewhat different scale and size compared to the R7. The Juno was actually a version of the Jupiter ballistic missile base unit with a different top end, and the actual satellite that was put on the top was very light. And in this case, I've scaled a Sputnik probe down, so everything in the top is actually only 10 kilos. So it's all just launching a 10 kilo satellite in this particular case, with a fairly big thrust system, and using spin stabilization for the second, third and final stage. The original Juno was a 4-stage. I haven't been able to reproduce that because of lack of solid thrusters, so I've made the third stage a little bit bigger than would strictly be necessary, but I'm trying to follow roughly the historical side. So this was rushed through. I think I'd said before the reason that this one wasn't originally put up, even though in theory it was available a year before Sputnik in 1956, was because it was a military rocket, and they didn't want to be seen to be putting military created rocket satellites up and start a escalation. But the Sputnik sort of threw that out the window, and with the Vanguard not working as expected, they went with the Jupiter project to produce the Juno 1. So the Juno 1 is on the launch pad waiting for launch, and this has a slightly different script to the R7. One key thing is this will actually run the script on the local computer, because this rocket may lose contact during its prograde flight. Therefore it needs to run totally autonomously from the Space Center. So the boot script for this, if I go into edit Juno boot, you'll see it actually copies over the Juno script to switch 1, which is number 1, which is the local computer, and then runs it from there. So it will be running, even if we lose connectivity through remote tech, this script will continue to run. I also had to change the remote tech settings to say do not go to 0 thrust if you lose connection to an aircraft. So that's something that if I lose connection whilst during thrust, it will continue to keep the thrust going, which I need for this to run. So if I now run Juno boot, it's now running the Juno 1 launch script. So we're going for a countdown to launch. 3, 2, 1, and ignition. And we've got a initial safe ignition, and the course of this particular ship is very different to the R7. Instead of being a consistent roll onto course all the way into the eventual orbit, this actually uses the first 2 stages just to get a good apoapsis of about 100 kilometers, and then the third and final stage is pointed in the right direction during that second stage, so that it can finally fire and establish the circularization. So there is a pause in the actual launch compared to the R7 script, which was pulling it all into orbit in one turn. That's also seen as as an adaptation, an increase of more complex internal navigation rather than using ground control to control the whole vehicle. The actual Explorer 1, which used the Juno 1 rocket, did actually just use solid rockets and did it in a single a single burn, but I decided to split it up on this burn because I can't get the burn factors quite high enough. As we get the ejection of stage 1, we're going into a spin stabilization. We have RCS to control our pitch and other factors, but it's no longer controlling roll, and roll is being allowed to just build up. That will keep a certain level of spin stabilization for the final satellite section, which has no inbuilt stabilization factors apart from the spin. It's important, and I'm not sure whether I got it 100% correct, but it is important to get that final stage as balanced as possible, so it doesn't have any oscillations away from the central point. I got close, and there we have the end of the turn, but we still have RCS control, so now we can have a look at our apoapsis. We have an apoapsis of 104 kilometers, and we're going into an insertion orientation, so it's now pushing the nose down as best it can to try and get a insertion. It's a fairly steep downward burn now on this insertion. I think that's a little too heavy. That's gone to about a 40 odd degrees negative, and I think that may be a bit high. I'm not sure we're going to get an insert on this one, but let's carry on. It may well surprise me. So our apoapsis is coming down, but I think that final insertion orientation was not quite good enough in this particular case, which is a pity. I think the insertion orientation should have been about 25 degrees, and we're running at about 40 degrees, so we're got a significant difference. I think we're just basically pushing ourselves down towards the planet now, so I think that's going to be a slight failure, and either needs to be reworked or given a bit more time for that insertion orientation to happen. Something didn't quite go right there, and we've passed our apoapsis and we're not gaining in distance here. I think this is going to be a failure, unfortunately. We've got a lot of oxidizer and fuel, but it is increasing, but I don't think that's going to increase enough by the time we hit the atmosphere again. And our apoapsis is starting to increase now, so there is a chance with this last bit that we might still get an insertion for our small satellite. And we're into the atmosphere now. And we're doing a burn up, I think, here before our periapsis will increase far enough. I think that's going to be a failure on Juno 1. Unfortunately, yep, we're starting to get explosions happening now. Our liquid fuel's just about expended, and we started to come up, but yes, that final burn needs to be adjusted, given a little bit more time to get onto the orientation. So that just goes to show that no matter how much testing you do and simulation, occasionally things will go wrong. So we've had a failure in that particular test, but we have got plenty of science now, and I will be in the next episode looking at the next stages, which will be getting some more satellites up for communication purposes, so that we don't lose communication to our satellites. We'll also be spending our points and looking at potentially what we need to do to start looking at first manned flights. And for that, we're going to have to do some testing of things such as parachutes, life support, and other elements to ensure that I don't lose a pilot, a Kerbal, a Gael, whatever they're called in this particular version. I'm still calling them Kerbal. Lose a Kerbal, so we need abort systems and all of those great things before we actually put a Kerbal up into space. So until next time, we did manage to get a satellite up into space, the first Sputnik. We'll now be looking at the first Explorer. Hopefully I will rework the Juno rocket a little bit, see if I can get that to give a little bit more time for that insertion burn to work on doing satellites, and maybe do a little bit of working on the R7 to get that apoapsis down a bit so it's a little bit more circularized on its orbit. To be honest though, the original Sputnik had a very high, it was not a perfect circular orbit, it had a high apoapsis to its periapsis, even on the satellite. I can't remember it now, but it was a few, quite a significant difference out there, but it was still an orbit, so it was still valid and we were still able to get our contract. Our next contract, as you saw, was to put a satellite up, but also return it from space. So we're going to have to create a multi-stage rocket, satellite with some sort of return system as well. So hopefully you are enjoying this new Galileo on hard mode KSP series, and I'm going to continue doing it. It's taking me, it's pushing my limits on maths, I must admit, and testing and building, so I'm quite enjoying it. So once a week I will still put some time into a video on this particular season. As always, leave a like and comment down below, but until next time, keep playing the game and have fun.